Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Leader to Leader podcast, the show where we bring together executives, authors, consultants, and leadership experts to share ideas, lessons, and best practices to help us all become better leaders. I'm your host, Tom Athenauer, and this episode is brought to you by the StarQuest Group. Over the years, we've worked with many different organizations that want to transform their cultures to be more agile, to be more innovative, to be able to make quicker decisions and be more change ready. And when we explore what it takes to create such a culture, we can't help but to look at the organization's stance around failure. In fact, in 2023, Amy Edmondson wrote an exceptional book entitled The Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well. Her research showed that many of us see failure as the opposite of success. And yet when we think about this polarity, we miss the point of trying to evaluate what's good failure and what's bad failure. And what she learned is that companies miss that opportunity to explore failure and how do we fail well. I've always been intrigued with this topic about learning to fail forward. Personally, I've certainly challenged myself to evaluate, how do I think about fear? How do I think about failure? And the question that I continually raise to myself is, how do I learn to fail intelligently? My guest today is Rhett Keisler, a serial entrepreneur. He's the founder of Beverage Ranch, a Texas-based beverage company dedicated to developing, managing, and scaling new adult beverage and spirit-based brands. Rhett was previously the co-founder and president of Revolver Brewing, a craft brewing company that was ultimately sold to Miller Coors a number of years ago. In our conversation, Rhett shares what he's learned about failing well and how he embraces failure as just part of their normal business process as they innovate new brands. So if you're curious about how to rethink failure, I think you're going to really be interested in this particular episode. I don't think you'll want to miss it. Let's jump into my conversation with Rhett. Rhett Keisler, welcome to the Leader to Leader podcast. So good to have you here.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here.
Yeah, I've been so looking forward to connecting up with you. I'd met you through a mutual friend who described you as that entrepreneurial, that serial entrepreneur that has ventured off into some really exciting different products. And so I was really excited to spend some time with you today talking about the whole idea. How do we as leaders learn to fail forward? How do we start to embrace and kind of counter some of the fear of failure that we deal with out there in the workplace? And so it's awesome to have you as my guest. So we're going to jump right into this. Would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself, about your background, and we'll transition into a discussion around the topic, the leadership topic for today.
Sure. Thank you, Tom, and great to be here. I didn't start out as an entrepreneur. I actually started out as a corporate finance guy, and so transitioned mid-career into the entrepreneurial world when I started a brewery with my father and some other great folks, and have been on that entrepreneurial venture ever since. I started Revolver Brewing in 2012. That was the first venture. And then I'm working on something right now called the Beverage Ranch. So we had a couple concepts that we've launched. And so that's the path so far. I'm originally from Arkansas. Grew up in an oil and gas family, so moved all over the place. We'd have those moments at the dinner table where you'd sit down and we were on our way to some other country or something. So moved around a lot, but originally from Arkansas, grew up in Houston, went to the University of Arkansas for my undergraduate and got my MBA at the University of Texas.
Awesome. Great. Well, it's so funny when you were talking about Revolver. And I remember when my son was going to college, I showed up in Fort Worth and he took us to a bar and he said, you got to try this blood and honey beer. And then when I learned that that was part of Revolver, the dots connected. I go, okay, this is really interesting. But talk a little bit about how you got into that original venture with Revolver Brewing, and then also you sold after 4 years, and then you're doing something else. So a little bit about that is really interesting relative to the entrepreneurial story here.
Yeah. We're going to talk a lot about failure today. So I think one of the things that when I first moved back to Texas, I went into my dad and he's an oil and gas executive. I mentioned I did corporate finance and a stint in investment banking. And so I knew some of the folks that were in private equity at that time. And, we said, hey, let's go out and try to assemble some oil and gas leases and really try and see if we can't put together a package. And, that was one of my first lessons in failure right there. We tried and tried and tried. And, oil was $100 a barrel. People weren't returning our phone calls, and the Eagleford Shale was hot. And, we, it took me about a year and a half, but we worked hard. We worked hard every day, but sometimes you just know when something's not going to come together. And
Yeah.
so a friend of mine had invited me over to homebrew at his house. And, there was a great brewery in Toronto where I'd lived before called Steam Whistle Brewing. And it was actually our realtor's brother that started Steam Whistle. And I remember thinking, these guys have a great job. They're in a brewery all day long. They get to make beer. How fun is that? And so when my friend invited me over to homebrew, it kind of brought back all those thoughts. And I thought, I wonder if that, I don't know. I just thought probably crazily, like, I'm going to look into this. So I looked into it and figured that Texas was the second largest consuming state in the nation. And yet we were 48th in the nation on breweries per capita.
No kidding. Okay.
That doesn't necessarily mean things have to change, but here is an opportunity potentially. And so I pitched my father on, hey, why don't we go start a brewery? And fast forward, we were so tired on waiting other people to get back to us on these properties that we were like, we came flying out of the gates because now it was just on us. So we bought property, we bought equipment, we went forward at lightning speed. And so, I started working on that mid 2011, and we sold our first keg September of 2012. And, we were lucky, my dad and I didn't know anything about brewing. And so we were lucky enough to team up with a master brewer, Grant Wood, fantastic guy and great brewer. And he's the reason that you've got blood and, you've heard of Blood and Honey. That wasn't the first beer, but it was, I think the second or third beer. And so that's where
So you hit that craft brewing cycle. That was starting to really get traction here in Colorado during that time frame, as well. So you hit a little bit of a cycle, a change in the desire for consumers to want that kind of microbrew, higher alcohol content. Is that fair to say?
In fact, one of my early experiences with craft beer was in Colorado. My parents have always been big into Airstreams, and they're camping out at the Garden of the Gods, and all the kids show up to surprise my mother for her 60th birthday party. And there is somebody there that brings a cooler full of Fat Tire to the camp out. And I remember having that beer thinking, God, this is great. I didn't know beer could do this.
Yes.
And so, that was Colorado was early on. And, I had traveled around and seen like, oh, wow, on the West Coast, this brewery thing has really popped off. Colorado, it was really, it had been moving in that direction for some years before I found out about it. And then my wife's from New York, and so we'd spent time up there. And Six Point Brewery was going big up there. Brooklyn Brewery was going big. And I thought, not that there weren't some breweries here in Texas. There were in the late 90s, there was a little bit of a push. You had Live Oak down in Austin, and different breweries in different cities, but it had kind of faded a little bit, and then it just came back. I think it was right after the financial crisis, and people were really just interested in kind of, where things are made, how they're made, what ingredients. There was just a renewed interest in all things craft at that time, and we just caught that wave at the right time.
Yeah. Yeah. So is it fair to say that you held on to Revolver for what, 4 years, and then you sold to Molson Coors, Miller Coors?
It was Miller Coors at the time. Now Molson.
Okay, Miller Coors at the time. So you had some quick success with Revolver. In our discussion, pre-interview discussion, you said that was really kind of unusual. It surprised you. And is that fair to say?
Yes. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like, I think at that time, things the stars really aligned for us. And it's a combination of hard work and luck and all that. We didn't experience a lot of failure during that time. And it almost made it look easy. And I think it's subsequent to Revolver where I feel like, wow, the industry has gotten a heck of a lot more competitive. And you really see like, wow, there was a time where, things went really well for us. And now it's a lot harder to be successful in that same industry.
Yeah. So what are you doing now? You sold in 2017, 2018,
So we sold
and
in
then you
September.
started something new, Beverage Ranch. Let's talk a little bit about that too. So after you
Yeah,
clarify when you sold.
we sold majority in 2000 September of 2016, and I stayed on for another 3.5, almost 4 years. So
Okay.
fast forward to COVID time, and that's when I stepped out and joined forces with a guy that I had met in the industry. Ryan Baird is his name. Super nice guy, sharp as can be. And, I was just like Ryan, and I went down and pitched him and I said, hey, let's build the Beverage Ranch. And the Beverage Ranch my pitch was, let's assemble a team of people that are really good at what they do and bring some new concepts to life.
Awesome. And so talk a little bit about Beverage Ranch, and you have a very hot new product coming out. Let's talk about that. And then we're going to talk about what you've learned in the last few years since you've started Beverage Ranch.
Yeah. So, we have a product right now that's out in the market called Slamsies, and we've been at it for about 2 years with Slamsies. And Slamsies is a 15% ABV, roughly 6-ounce drink. So small volume, highly powered. We'll just say that.
Okay.
So,
Okay. All right. Okay.
and it's primarily sold in convenience, although we're growing grocery fast. In fact, I think we just picked up 1,700 Walmart stores that we're mandated into. So we're moving in the right direction there. But just like anything, I'm always very cautious about, success and is this going to make it and is it not? So I'd say we're not out of the weeds yet, but we definitely are moving in the right direction.
Just just like a can of beer, but it's a cocktail. Is that what it is?
These are ready to drink drinks, exactly. And you just screw
Okay.
the top off and
Okay.
you can drink it.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So you are in that business now. You talked about how when you were a Revolver Brewing, how that success, and you've had a lot of failure with this. And we're looking at failure in a very positive way, y'all. Just
Oh,
kind
yeah,
of keep that in mind.
that's what we're
This
here
is
for
part of the
today.
game. That's what we're
Yeah.
here for today. So talk a little bit about what you've experienced recently, because you had a really good when you said, "Hey, you know what? This was almost easier than we expected doing Revolver." And what have you learned now? Competition is higher. It's a little harder to get on the distribution, got changing consumer tastes. Talk a little bit about that. And then some of what you've learned around failure.
Yeah. So when we came out of the gates with Beverage Ranch, we launched a product called Watertight Cocktails. And Watertight Cocktails was a canned drink with all real ingredients. And when I say all real, I mean all real. There were no flavorings, additives of any kind in there. It was fresh frozen juice, natural sweeteners, sugar or agave nectar. And we're basically building because at that time you have to remember there were a lot of seltzers in the market. So these fake flavored seltzers are out in the market, and they're doing really well. And we thought, that's great. They're low calorie, and but let's build something that is all real, that tastes like a regular cocktail, like you would make at home. And we
Yeah.
did. We went out and sourced fresh frozen juice and fruit purees from all these different places, and put it in a can. And, and I could get into all kinds of decisions that you have to make. But if you're going to go print have cans that are printed, you have to buy 200,000 something at a time. So, these are, we talk about failing in little steps versus big steps. So you got to go stick your neck out on some of this stuff. And anyway, at the end of the day, and we're still, and that's one of the things we should probably talk about today is like the aftermath, like looking back and saying, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And, you don't want to spend too much time navel gazing, but trying to figure out what worked and what didn't work. Anyway, we ended up we had some success getting that product out into market, but it just never really took off. And, is the timing wrong? Were we too early? Was the can too bright? Did it not signal all natural, real ingredients? Because we have to, in the beverage markets, you have to play at certain price points. And it was just a very difficult business for us. And that's one of the tough lessons. I mean, we were basically selling Ferraris at Yugo prices. So, we're building these very difficult to make, all real drinks, and trying to compete at a price point with seltzers. And it's just very difficult to do. So then that changes your whole business model. Well, do you want to take this into a more niche type distribution model instead of grocery, mass grocery? And so it brings up a lot of questions. And it wasn't so much that, well, you don't always know the answers at the end of the day. You're only theorizing after the fact. But we didn't either people don't care or we didn't get the message across. That's the short at the end of the day. So, and that's really, one of the things that we talk about is, we want to try things. Let's try it. Let's figure out if it works or not. And let's try, and if we're going to fail, let's try to fail in small ways or a way that's not, lethal, and move on. And sometimes you can't do that. You have to launch in a big way and you have to put your chips on the table. And so, unfortunately, that's one of those type of things that in the beverage business, you're out there and you just to get a certain level of scale, you have to make the investments. And sometimes you can't fail in a small way. You have to make your bet.
Yeah. So how have you built this capacity yourself to address some of that fear? Because it's really easy. You cannot play it safe and be in that conservative space and be in that entrepreneurial environment where you're really trying to innovate and introduce new ideas and tap into new markets. How have you built that capacity yourself? Is that just part of who you are, or is it a challenge for you even today in doing the work that you're doing?
B. It is a challenge for me. It's not A, it's B. It is a challenge. I think that, and that's one of the reasons partnerships are so good because frankly, Ryan, my business partner, he's kind of let's go just lay it on the line and see what happens. Let's make a decision. I know I can be guilty of analysis to paralysis if I'm not careful. Because, you're always looking for another input into the model, or you're looking for, some type of way to lessen the risk. But make no mistake, I mean, at the end of the day, people always think entrepreneurs are risk takers. We're forced to take risks. We don't have an option, but we want to minimize those risks. I mean, we're no different than anybody else. I mean, now there may be some entrepreneurs out there that just love gambling and love to just, for the excitement and the adrenaline of it. But I think most entrepreneurs, they're trying to figure out how to de-risk the moves that they're making. And so back to your original question about me, I fight it. I really do. It's tough. You have to make bets and you just have to say, okay, well, this is the way we're going to make this bet. But I'm always trying to figure out is there some way that we could get an indication of something before we really lay it on the line?
So when you were talking so is that meaning doing some some toe in the water type of testing and hypotheses and market tests? Is that what you're talking about?
Sure. I'll give you
to try to mitigate some of that risk?
I'll give you a perfect example. So with Revolver, we had a tasting room, and even Ryan Baird, he founded Yellow Rose Distillery in Houston. They had a tasting room. So you really were in touch with your consumer and you got to have conversations around beers and, in his case, whiskeys, and talk about what they liked and what they didn't like. Now you have to be careful because people who've had a drink at your establishment are going to tell you things you want to hear a lot of times. So you're really, but when you're talking
because their motivation is maybe they'll get a little bit more of a taste, right?
I mean, let's look at incentives here, right? So
yeah.
So you have to be careful there. But I think that you talk to enough people, you start to see some common themes, common threads, and you start to say, okay, maybe not, or maybe so. And so there's just ways to try things out. So yeah, anytime you can pilot test, you can bench test, anything that you can do in a small way before you've got to go make your big bet. I mean, that's just natural. Why would you, unless there's time constraints or, you're going to miss the bus on something. If there's a way to pilot test something, obviously we always try to do that.
So do you think that I'm curious around that there's this sort of premise or this it's not a belief, but it's that the more public failures that one has, that's a good thing. That a lot of times we privately fail and we get to the point where we just kind of keep the failure contained. We don't let it out. But in our conversations, you're very open about the failures and but there's a different way that you frame it. There's a different way that you think about it. Talk to me about how you think about failures and missteps and then how do you rebound from that to be able to set the course in a new direction? Because
Yes.
our leaders are dealing with that a lot, you know?
Yeah. Well, Ryan and I talk about it all the time in that what we do is problem solving. That is what we're doing every day. And some riddles are easier than others and some aren't. And, I mean, at the end of the day, some things are more knowable, some things aren't. Sometimes you just got to go out there and do it. But um, I don't know. We feel like sometimes that's just part of the journey. You're going to fail some. You try to minimize it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not proud of failing on any of these things, but
Yeah, yeah, no, I
if,
do.
if somebody wants to come after me because we failed, well, we weren't trying hard enough if we didn't fail somewhere. I mean, I know everybody's heard that. And so, but yeah, we don't like to fail. We like to strategize. We like to think about what if things go right? What if things go wrong? How could we de-risk this? It's problem solving. It feels like a riddle many times. Like, okay, well, here are the parts of this puzzle. How do we unlock this? And, sometimes you don't. And that's just part of it. It's part of it. If you're afraid to fail, it's going to be a tough road for an entrepreneur. I mean, it is a psychological journey. There's no question about it. Some days you wake up and you go, whew, I don't know. And then some days you wake up and you're on cloud nine and everything's wonderful. And so it is a whipsaw. I mean, but I couldn't, it would be very difficult. And then you get into psychology and just the way people are made up. I don't think Ryan and either one of us could do the same job over and over and over every day. That's just not something that's in our DNA and in our makeup. In fact, we like to create. We like that creation phase of things. We like building it. Once something gets to a certain level where it's turning the crank, we call it, that's tough for us. We like to get up in the morning thinking about how to solve new problems. I'm not saying we're
So
always good at it, and then we
yeah,
we fail sometimes. It's just
yeah.
and I think maybe it's not something it's not something that I mean, it's just part of what we do. I don't look at it like I'm a lesser person for it. I just go, well, I tried.
So let me throw this at you because I know that based upon the feedback that we get from our listeners and whatnot, there's a lot of leaders out there in mid market and larger companies where the sort of the corporate strategic initiative is around change and how do we become more change ready? How do we be more innovative? How do we be more agile? And yet there's mixed messages. There's this high focus on short term results that is driving this almost like playing not to lose. And yet the strategic initiative is around how do you be more innovative, take more risk, counter some of the fear around failure. How if I'm one of those listeners out there that are thinking this, how might you respond to that? How do I deal with that? It's almost like a tension between playing it safe and playing it to win relative to, hey, you know what? They say they want failure, but culturally it really doesn't play all that well out here. How do you kind of interact? What suggestions or ideas might you have for somebody that's kind of thinking that as they're listening to this conversation?
I mean, that is a complex subject. There's no question about it because I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen some of this myself, but not a lot. But um, I mean, you do hear a lot about how do we get,
Yeah.
fail faster and was it break things, and I forget what the quote is, but like, and I know that big companies want to do that, but the truth is it's not always possible for them to do it. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
things, in my opinion, a lot of things have to happen correctly for a company to be a successful innovator. I mean, there's a reason that small entrepreneurial companies can exist and survive in this world.
Yeah.
If all the corporations did it really well, we'd be out of a job. So,
Yeah.
It's very difficult to do. I mean, at first the structural, how, companies are just, a big company is set up to be a big company, for a reason. And they have these layers and they have these processes and they have these hierarchies, and they need to, because they're managing thousands of people potentially.
Sure.
If
Yeah.
there's 8 of us, we can turn it on a dime in that room that day and talk
Yeah.
about it and talk about everybody's feelings and how they, and are we all on the same team and we're ready to go forward? Does anybody have any doubts? Okay, then let's go. And that's just very difficult to do in a big company. So that culture has to come from the top, but it also has to structurally exist. I mean, if I'm sitting there and I'm looking at, well, I could be innovative and maybe I get a pat on the back, but if I fail, I get a pink slip, or it hurts my career in some way.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I mean, let the people they're going to, um, it's incentives, right? Or disincentives. And so
Yeah.
I can understand that tension, and I can understand the precarious nature of trying to innovate in a big company. I mean, I've since we first started talking, I've thought a little bit about it, and again, I don't have, I don't have the, I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I know somehow people have to be shielded to innovate. They have to be able to have a free
Mm.
space, a safe space to go innovate. Um, if you do get thrown under the bus for coming up short, that's tough.
It'll kill it right there. Yeah, I
That's
agree
what
with
it's
you
going to do.
totally. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
first of all, it has to come from the top, I think, because if it's not supported at the top, I don't think it goes anywhere. But I think
Yeah.
once it comes from the top, then not only culturally do you have to work around it, but structurally you've got to give people, I don't call it a firewall or whatever, but you got to be able to have a lab or a firewall between you and the company and the other thing is that, I mean, you just said it, they're short-term focused. There's quarterly numbers, especially in a public company.
Yeah.
Analysts want to know, what are you doing this quarter? What are you doing next quarter? That kind of thing. And so, and as management changes and missions change and direction change. And it depends on, it's about identifying, what do you want us to solve? Like, I'm just putting myself in their position. What do you want
Yeah.
us to solve? And do I have the protection, and how long do I have to solve it? And, um, is that mission going to change next quarter?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. And having the authority to make the changes, and do I have the air cover, to your point around having it from a top down? You got to have that. Um, but I'm also hearing something around creating the safe space for you individually, but also with your teams, of having real clear boundaries and what's in bounds, what's out of bounds, and having that clarity and almost like an agreement with those that you report to, as to what it is that you're asking us to do, and what's within range and what's outer range. I think that clarity might help, saying, okay, this is what we did. We failed on this thing. Hey, this is what we were charged with doing. And we'll make some course corrections, but we need to have some safe space kind of in
Yeah.
that's with some boundaries around it too. Right.
So that in the entrepreneurial world, we call that a business plan, right? Like, what is our
Yeah.
business plan? And I used to there's a couple things I remember going through graduate school. I remember thinking, culture, it's kind of touchy feely. I don't really understand culture and all that culture smulture and business plans. Those are kind of two things. Let me tell you, nothing's more important than culture. I've learned that the hard way, or just learned it over time. Culture is probably the most important thing. Then you better have your business plan. And when I say business plan, I have people that come up to me and they know I'm entrepreneur, and they'll ask me like, hey, I want to start such and such. The first thing I always tell them, like, I don't care if you're starting a lemonade stand. I don't mind. I don't care what it is. Write out your business plan, because when you are forced to put pen to paper, it forces a certain, um, uh, you know, uh, rigor to your thinking, because
Yeah. Yeah.
and then you can start to see, where things may not line up. And so I always encourage people to write the business plan, and that lays out in writing what's going to happen, what you think, what your assumptions, hypotheses are. And I would encourage any team to do that same thing. What problem are we solving, and what is our plan?
Yeah.
And write it out, and who's responsible for what. And because people get, memories are fuzzy and blame starts, if you don't have it written down. So I always want to encourage people, in innovation, you really need to document. I mean, think about it like Ryan and I talk about solving puzzles. Just think about it like a scientist would. There's a hypothesis. You're trying different things and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And, just like a scientist, and I'm not a scientist, so I don't want to act like one, but I know there's a lot of documentation of what works and what doesn't work. And I would encourage anybody that's in an innovative, group like that, understanding the plan, writing down who's doing what, and documenting results. And because that helps that feedback loop, and it helps you pivot to the next round of the next iteration of whatever you're trying to solve. Because if things are loose and you're not sure what problem you're solving or who's working on what, or, what result really happened, and what went on,
Yeah.
3 months ago, but nobody can quite remember, and there's different opinions of it. That's when people start, I guess it opens the door for people to throw each other under the bus a little bit, because they, may not want to be associated with that or whatever. And it is encouraging that culture inside the team to, I've got your back. I mean, I can tell you at Revolver, we would sit in the room, and let's say, there's probably 4 of us in the room at that time, occasionally 5. And it was, okay, here's the situation that we're facing, some maybe internal organizational thing or something like that, or we wanted to try something a little different. We would write out the problem. We'd figure out what we thought the solution was. If we had somebody that disagreed, that was noted, but at the end of the meeting, we said, okay, everybody, are you on board? Around the room. Yes, I'm on board. Yes. So we got to get yeses from everybody. Like, we're on board. Now, you may have lodged a disagreement and you think we need to go a different way, but I don't need somebody on the team undercutting to try and prove they're right. I want them to be like, hey, let's go make this work. And if it doesn't work, maybe we'll come back and try my way, but let's go see if this works. So you've got to have that agreement among your team, and that trust that you guys are all in the same little boat.
Yeah. So this is fascinating. You talked about culture. I want to back up just a bit, and you talked about culture being most important. Say a little bit more on that, because culture, you can have an organizational culture, but I think we have these micro cultures, like microclimates that are part of teams, and you can create. I, as a team leader, can create my culture within my team. Talk a little bit about why that's so important, and how you think about culture, and why it is such a high priority.
Culture it's because it's the way everybody treats each other and what they feel is important. It's their values. It's the psychology of that group. And that is why it's so important. People talk about leadership all the time. And I know that, I've learned a lot about leadership over the years. And, I first started, and when I was younger, I thought it was about telling people what to do. And you quickly realize that is not what it's about. And if there's anything that, I think it's probably more about it, and that is, you have to kind of, now that I've got two girls, that one's in college, one's just graduating from high school. Leadership's about, setting a good example. It's about caring about them, caring about their well-being. It's about setting them up for success. It's about giving them the right tools and the resources that they need to succeed. It's about knowing when to be a little hands off, when to be a little hands on. It's that nurturing, and it ultimately is about just trying to create an environment where they are motivated and incentivized to, their best well-being, I guess is the way I can say it. Now, it doesn't always work with my daughters, but I do the best I can. No, they're great.
Welcome to the club, right? Yeah. We all try to do the best job we can.
Yeah. But that's and in a corporate sense, you've got to have somebody that has your back. You have to have people that have your back in that type of a setting. You gotta, and let's face it, who wants to go to work every day and, be ordered around, thrown under the bus? Just look at what you don't want and just say, well, that's not what you want leadership to be. It's all those things you do want. Now, I know sometimes there's tough conversations that need to be had, and I get that, but that's why I think culture is so important, because it's what motivates people every day to come in, do what they do. And, if we're doing it right, they're excited about it. And giving us their best.
Yeah. That it's you were talking about, um, if you take somebody out, blame, shame, whatever it is within a team system, boy, that is gonna have a huge impact. It will shut the whole team down. I've observed that several times where somebody on the team will throw the blame card down, or they'll publicly shame them. Well, why did you do it that? And it will completely cause this retreat back, and you're not going to be able to get to what you're talking about around very collaborative problem solving if you've got that microclimate or culture going on within whatever domain you're responsible for as a leader. So it just doesn't work. Yeah.
Not at
And
all.
you
No.
and you also talked about modeling too in the case of parenting, but it's also modeling of doing what it is that almost like you set the tone, you lead from the front, and really modeling and behaving in a certain way that is commensurate or aligned with what you're asking them to do. So,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. Business plan, you talked about that. Some of our clients will call it the mission. What are we trying to accomplish? The same sort of thing. We have this in our world. A lot of our listeners have gone through Leadership Circle, which is this circle, and on the top part, you'll get it real quick. But you have this solid line through the middle, and on the top part of it, we call it above the line, which is more of those creative competencies, those ways that you as a leader show up creatively. And on the bottom side, it's more fear based and it's reactive. It's where you retreat to out of fear. And what you're talking about relative to building that sort of above the line, kind of where are we trying to move towards in service to the problem solve. That's also another element that I picked up in your we got to be real clear on what we're trying to solve for and then figure out how do we move towards that and then get everybody on board. We need everybody on board. You may not agree, but we need everybody on board. That's
Yeah,
something that
and
I
I'm
heard you
sure
say.
that can be I'm sure that can be challenging, right? Because we have small groups that we work with and big
Yeah.
companies have large groups. And, not and it takes all types, I guess, that can play different roles on a team. So maybe that's a way to help them find something that works well for them. But really at the end of the day, if you're going to have an innovative team, and if we're still talking about innovation here, you
Yeah.
have to have the right psychology. You have to have people that that have the right temperament, the right curiosity, and I would stress curiosity, big time. They love to solve problems. They're creative, all of those type of things. That's and I can't, I don't know what all teams exist out there in our listener in
Yeah.
the world of our listeners, but sometimes somebody may just not be a great person for innovation, and so maybe you figure out what can they do, and that's obviously a one-off conversation, but you have to have the right uh, the right folks at the
Yeah.
end of the day.
You do. And I think that even though you refer to smaller entrepreneurial companies, that's why large companies try to break off, take and these start these skunk works and separate them from the mothership or the corporate structure to allow for some of that innovation and not let the corporate culture kill it. But yet when they sort of integrate back in it, it's challenging for leaders to be able to survive as part of a kind of like a subset within. Um,
Yeah, yeah. There's a certain autonomy that exists if it's done right in those
yeah.
innovation circles, if you want to call it that. And so, moving those in and out, that's I can imagine that causes some natural stressors.
Yeah. You strike me when I first met you, I thought that you're a very creative guy, but I'm hearing a lot of structural process that comes out in how you innovate and how you deal with fear and sort of that failure and innovation. Um, because you talk a lot about business plans, you've talked about steps, and you've talked about, when you do have failures, you talked about debriefs and all those. So in some ways, you've almost normalized that, is what I'm hearing, but you have some structure to it. Am I reading this right? There's
Well,
structure to how you deal with this stuff.
you have to, and that structure is your guide. Um, somebody that's just creative. I mean, they can be great. That somebody that's just creative that doesn't really look backwards. They're just creating all the time. That can be a very useful team member. But somebody has to be there writing things down and figuring out like, oh, okay, what went on, and there has to be structure to those innovation teams in there. And in my life, yes, I definitely have. I guess I'm trying to think about the right. I had a professor in my graduate studies, and his name is Jeff Sandifer, brilliant guy. He was an entrepreneur. He was our entrepreneurial professor, and he taught these Harvard Business School cases, and he taught through the Socratic method. And it was so frustrating for me because we never got answers really during the day. It was all about he was masterful at leading the class, and people would, he'd ask questions and people would talk, and then that would bring on more questions. And I just kept thinking, God, it's just all about questions. Like, when do we get the answer to the case? And pretty
Yeah.
soon you realize that the answer is not always, for that particular case, is not always the important thing. It's about asking the right questions. And so that started me out thinking, okay, if you're going to ask the right questions, you got to have a framework for processing, A, what are the questions? And B, you have to have a framework for processing the answers to all those questions. So I guess I always viewed it. I know Charlie Munger, Buffett's right-hand man out there, always had this concept of mental models. And basically it was building a framework of the way he thought. And each little mental model was like maybe from a different area of, whether it be engineering or what, finance or whatever it was. He would learn these things, but he had a framework to hang them on. And I've always thought that framework to hang these things that you learn on is important. It's a way of organizing them. It's a way of processing things that I've just, you learn over time, it creates a lot of questions, but you have to have a way to organize them.
Yeah. So when you talk about framework, is it safe to say that there's a framework that you believe is important for us as listeners to connect into relative to dealing with disappointment, dealing with failure, is that what you're talking about relative to framework?
When I say framework, I just mean it's a way for me to organize my thoughts around like what we're going through. So if we've got some
Okay, gotcha.
creative
Okay, got it.
challenge, it's a way for me
Got
to
it.
organize my thoughts. And as far as the emotions go and the psychology around it, that is just dealing with failure and making sure that you're honest with yourself. That's a thing that I've find to be it's a little bit of a struggle, right? Through
Yeah.
taking those leaps and dealing with that failure. But at the end of the day, you have to be humble about your abilities. And that's one of the things I always tell my daughters, that the easiest person to fool is yourself. And it's like, if you don't know how to do something, or you're not good at it, you better admit it right up front and go find somebody else that is. And, it's so freeing too, right? It's tough to be good at everything, and nobody is. And, if somebody tells you other line, and
Yeah.
so like, get
Yeah.
that humbleness early, get that curiosity. And that curiosity is part of that. I don't know it. I don't know the answer. And it's okay. It's okay to say, I don't know, and learn to live that way. And, if you're not good at something, say, I screwed that up. How can I not do that again in the future? And so, I think it's a freeing thing at the end of the day, just from like a pure psychology piece.
Yeah, that curiosity is huge right now because what it does is it gives people permission to explore and not be so focused on the answer or getting to whatever it is that they need to get to, that you have a little bit of latitude to explore it a little bit, which is what I heard you learned from your professor in grad school, that part of this is not just getting to the answer, but the exploration and the consideration of different viewpoints of how do we deal with this and whatnot. So,
Yeah, he used to
uh,
call it the simplicity on the backside of complexity. And at first, I didn't know what he was talking about. And then you realize, when you look at a problem, things often appear very simple on the surface. You're like, oh, I think I understand this. So you start digging in. And then you start realizing that most problems are more complex than they often appear. And especially if they're in a Harvard Business School case study. They're not going to
yes,
put the simple
absolutely.
ones in there.
Just even being there as a case
Yeah,
study. Yep,
right.
there's going to be
So
some complexity. Yeah.
there's some complexity there. So then you start digging in, and, then once you are, and it takes a while to get through all that complexity because it starts growing and growing. Then you start ruling out certain things like, okay, that's a rabbit hole, that's a red herring, let's not do, okay, that doesn't make sense. Da, 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 da. You get through that complexity, and then there's a simplicity on the backside of that complexity. It starts to come together for you, and that's where you start to pull your answers from. And then, you know, and then that's when I always have to say, okay, now act, go act, let's go. And that's always the toughest part for me. But
Oh, that's so good. I'm seeing this arc, it's like you start out with simplicity and then you expand it out and then you pull it back into simplicity, complexity, simplicity
yeah, the
as a way to,
simplicity on
and
the
then the
backside of
execution.
complexity.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's really an interesting way to think about a process to deal with some of this.
Yeah, there's, and you talk about these mental models, and just another one. Anytime we're thinking about something, what if things go really right, and what if things go really wrong? And so it's just that simple of we always ask that. It's just like, okay, that little model is hung on somewhere on a branch, and it's like, how do we structure things if things go right, and how do we mitigate our our downside if things go really wrong? And so, and there's just lots of little questions like that. I mean, gosh, there's another one that is the 4 quadrant matrix, and it's things I know, and things I know I know, things I know I don't know, things I
Yep.
don't know I know, and things I don't know I don't know. Right? It's
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
4 quadrants,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
some of them are really easy, and one or two of them will absolutely kill you if you're not careful. So
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
just like things like that that kind of help sort through as we're moving through from simplicity to complexity and back to simplicity. It's certain things that we have to ask ourselves that help sort through and start to help reduce some of that complexity. So just
Do you,
that's the type of models I'm talking about that we use in the framework.
I want to go back, hit one more thing, and then we're going to go to kind of some final thoughts. Um, do you think that people are just wired to go to the worst case scenario? Because you were talking about mapping out and describing what it will look like in the greatest success, but also the downside of failure. If what happens if it doesn't go as planned?
Yeah.
Do you think that we're just wired to go to sort of that negativity bias?
I don't think everybody is. I think I am, and I've been accused of it, frankly. But I had a lot of training in that. I worked for a fund that we lent money out, and I used to joke we were like somewhere between a bank and a loan shark. And so, you know, like we would lend money out, and it was a special situations fund, and the idea was to lend money out, get paid a above bank rate. But at the end of the day, we weren't loaning to own. We really wanted to get our money back and move on to the next loan. And anytime you're loaning money out, you go to the downside pretty quickly. What if things don't go right? What assets do we have? Is there how do we buttress our fail scenario here? And so I had a lot of training in that regard.
Risk management. I mean, it's really what you're talking about. Absolutely. Yeah.
Risk management.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, that is one of the best we saw. We were approached. We probably saw 100 requests, a year. So I don't know if it was that many, but it was a lot per year. And I remember when I first started at this company, it was like I was writing this kind of synopsis on what I thought about this loan opportunity. And it was more stream of consciousness, I was kind of wandering all over the place. And I remember the first time I turned one of those in, you talk about a failure. My boss came back and was like, you've got to organize this, this is stream of consciousness. I want I want your thesis and the first 2 sentences. Then I want all the quick informational blurb. Then I want pros. Then I want cons, and then all these cons. I want risk mitigant or risks and mitigants. I want the mitigants laid out. And so again, like it drives that process of you have to be very process oriented to sort through this stuff. And and again, write out if things go right, how do we want to structure this deal? If things go wrong, how do we want to help protect ourselves? So I got a lot of training in that. But yeah, that was a failure that turned into a success, and that I was quickly taught how to write up an investment thesis. I didn't get that right the first time.
Well, that's so fascinating. People think that entrepreneurs are just wired that way, but you come from a very structured, kind of a risk management environment. And so thus the reason why the partnership is such an important piece, the two of you coming together with Beverage Ranch, Ryan Baird, right? Who was your
Ryan
partner that
Baird.
brought that sort of, push the envelope and the outer bounds, but that there's that checks and balances to be able
Most
to,
definitely. I had that with
yeah,
my father at Revolver. My father was like, he's always his famous saying, let's go do something, even if it's wrong. And so that's him. He's ready, fire, aim.
yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
like, aim, aim, aim. Okay, let's fire. So
Let's go. Yeah.
it takes that partnership. That's probably one of the things that I always tell people. If some entrepreneur comes to me and says, hey, I've got this idea, I want to go do something. I'm like, that's great, but doing it yourself is a tough road. You almost need somebody, if nothing else, just to verbally process stuff. I just want to talk it out and talk through things and get a different viewpoint. So I oftentimes say, what are you good at and what are you bad at? Because you go find somebody that's good at the things that you're bad at, you know?
Which really builds a case for why collaboration in teams is such a critical piece, that you've got to look for the blends of the talents and the different perspectives and mental models that everybody brings to you need that as
You
opposed to
need
just
it,
being,
most
yeah, you
definitely.
really
Yeah.
do. Really
You're
do.
doing something by yourself. I mean, unless it's just purely research academic or something like that. I mean, if it's a
Yeah.
multifaceted thing that nobody has all those skills, you really need
Yeah.
partnerships and you show me your partners and I'll show you your future a little bit.
Yeah. So three things. If you were to provide three sort of words of wisdom or three things for our listeners to think about as they are working out or driving home, what would be the three things that you would want them to think about? Maybe questions related to this kind of countering fear, feeling the fear and doing it anyway, kind of addressing this failure.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing people, then I think everybody struggles with it, talking to themselves. It's being honest with yourself. It's being honest with yourself. What what type of person are you and what motivates you? What scares the hell out of you? And are you cut out for certain things? And just being honest with yourself of what you want to do. I mean, life's short. So I think being honest with yourself, I think people can sometimes, be it sunk cost fallacies or whatever it is, like stay in something too long so being honest with yourself that's a much broader topic of what people want out of life, what they're good at, and when to make decisions on certain
What gives them
things.
energy and purpose and
Yeah,
whatnot?
what
Yeah.
drives them?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
drives?
Yeah. Yeah.
I oftentimes when I'm interviewing people, I spend a lot of time just asking them about, what do they like doing and what drives them. And, you can learn a lot about a person, I think, just by getting at those type of things.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and being honest with yourself is also about being humble and understanding that you don't have all the pieces, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
that because there are
Yeah.
things that you probably are really good at. The second thing um, is, I don't know. I think I would encourage them to develop that framework of how they process and how they, you know, digest information and go through that simplicity through the simplicity on the backside of complexity. I mean, building that in my mind helps me navigate the world, and it's hard for me to imagine not having that framework there. And sometimes it helps just to kind of think about it, lay it out on paper, and how you get through processing large amounts of information, or at least information that sometimes it's not always clear.
Yeah. And you talked about it in our pre-interview around how you view that process of collecting data, almost like an experimentation process, because that's going to get you closer to the best outcome you can possibly get to. So you say that, see sort of the failure, stop, start, tried new things, different, those are all part of the data collection that you're gathering intelligence to get you to the right outcome or the best informed outcome you could possibly get to.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
So,
the third thing is,
yeah.
I had somebody tell me this a long time ago, and I didn't understand it, I think, until I got a little bit older. But they said, Rhett, when it comes to this stuff, you have to really, really care. I mean, really care. You have to give it your all. You have to really, really care. But in the end, not so much. And I thought, what? What does that mean? And, it just means keep it in perspective. Like you got to really, really care, give it your all, but in the end, not so much. Like, don't let it
Yeah.
get to you. We're all
Well,
have fun, do things that make you laugh, and so,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's always stuck with me.
I love that. Somebody once described care, but don't care too much,
Yeah.
to the point, same sort of line of reasoning.
Yeah, as an entrepreneur, you can live. I mean, you can take it to dinner. And I struggle with that too because I'm thinking about things, and at night, and I have to really remind myself that you got to really, really care. But in the end, not so much.
Yeah. We're going to end on that. Rhett, this has been a pleasure. Thanks for the time. This has been fun. And then they're called Slamsies, and they're now in your favorite retailer, or soon to be.
Yes, yes. If you're trying to get the party started in a quick way, Slamsies. SLOMZEES. Slamsies.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for the time. Have a good week.
Thank you, Tom.
See you soon. All right, that is a wrap for this episode. One thing that stood out in my conversation with Rhett was how he has learned to normalize failure, kind of lean into risk and embrace risk and failure as just part of the entrepreneurial journey. He talked about the importance of following process, and he sees it as related to kind of problem solving and how does that help us make better decisions going forward. And that he really stressed the importance that leaders, when they are taking those risks, to make sure that they've done their homework, they've done their research, they've gathered the data, and then make some bold moves and execute. He also talked about, along the lines of making some of those action steps and bold moves, being smart enough to course correct when things don't go as planned, pivot quickly. Some people call it fail fast and shift. Rhett framed failure as kind of with a few powerful ways to think about it. He sees good failure as an investment in data gathering and as a way to test ideas quickly. And he certainly does not view failure as a reflection of his personal value or leadership ability. So here's something to think about on your drive home tonight. What's your view of failure? Do you see it as the opposite of success, or are you thinking more about failure as a polarity, that there's good failure and there's bad failure, and I want to maximize my good failure? I think about this quite often because it's something that I've struggled with over the years, and something that I'm constantly asking myself is, what's the cost of not being willing to fail well? And I think that's a really powerful question. For a summary of today's conversations, we've included a few takeaways in the show notes, and we've also included how you can get a hold of Rhett. If you've enjoyed today's episode, follow us on your favorite platform and leave us a rating or a review. It really does help others find this show. Leadership isn't easy, but it can be incredibly fulfilling and rewarding, and we need more great leaders. So go out and lead with courage, lead with authenticity, and lead with curiosity. Until next time, have a great week.